If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. What is the spookiest, most terrifying thing you've experienced or seen that no one believes when you tell them? Years ago, something knocked 3 times on my bathroom door, and nobody else was home. I was in the shower, and I always felt the need to shut and lock the door when I showered in that house. I had a feeling of being cornered in that bathroom. The weird thing is that it was a brand new house. I thought maybe it was my so playing a prank, though it was way too early for him to be home from work. I jumped out and quickly got dressed, but he wasn't home. He sat on the driveway until he got back. Also, in the same house, I woke up in the middle of the night one time to my dog standing over me in the bed and staring out into the living room, growling. This was a goofy, happy dog who never met a stranger. Not a watchdog at all. And the fact that he didn't get off the bed or go check it out was creepy as hell. He eventually laid back down but seemed on edge. Needless to say, I stayed in bed and didn't face that doorway. I live in a house that only has the master bedroom, a smaller bedroom, and a small bathroom at the top of the stairs. The 2 bedroom doors face each other, maybe 7 to 8 feet apart. I'm the only one who lives on the top floor, everyone else stays on the ground floor. I always get a weird vibe from the bedroom across from mine, so I always keep the door shut. One day, about 2 years ago, I had come home from college at the time and decided to take a nap. I remember laying down and falling asleep rather quickly, but something felt wrong. I sat up and noticed that the door to my bedroom was open. The door to the guest bedroom was also open. I watched the doorway for a moment, like I was waiting for something. I didn't even know what I was waiting for, truthfully, but I waited. Surely enough, this thing bent itself down to look back at me through the guest bedroom doorway. It was tall, way too tall for the size of the room. I only remember it having antlers and being very dark or shadowy in form. Also, its eyes. Its eyes were a very muted red tone and flat, like there was no other shape or feature of its face. I felt like it wanted to come into my room, but for whatever reason, it couldn't. And it was pissed about it. We never exchanged anything verbal, but I remember calmly looking at it and reminding it that it was not welcome in my room, much less my house. I knew it was just waiting for an opportunity where my guard was down. And then I woke up. Both of the doors were closed, and everything was fine. I was spooked to hell and back. I burned so much incense that I thought I was going to smoke out my entire family. I haven't seen or dreamt of it since, but a lot of the guests I brought into the house do not like that room. Whatever it was, I hope it's gone for good. I grew up in a small town in Victoria, Australia. There wasn't much to do as a teenager, so 2 of my friends and I would walk around the streets at night looking for parties to gatecrash, lol. We never found one. On one particular night, we decided to walk down a street on the outskirts of town, which was surrounded by farmland and a few industrial buildings. There was a street light maybe every 20 meters, so the street itself was very dark. Once we got to a particular street light, we heard the sound of intense wings flapping from above us. We each looked up, and what we saw is something I still don't fully comprehend. Its wingspan seemed enormous, and along with its wings, it seemed to have 4 limbs and an oddly humanoid shape. It made the sound of what I can only describe as the piercing sound a train makes when it makes a turn. The 3 of us sprinted back to town and did not say a word to each other for about 30 seconds of sprinting. None of us could figure out what this was, but from popular culture, it seems similar to the Mothman legends that have been described throughout the world. One of the legends is that the appearance of the Mothman is a prophecy for death. The mother of one of the friends I was with that night died of cancer shortly after. Another thing worth nothing, there was a patch of graffiti on a rail bridge close to the area where this happened. The graffiti was of a humanoid figure with large wings. I'd never taken much notice of it over the years, until that night. I grew up in a small town in Victoria, Australia. There wasn't much to do as a teenager, so 2 of my friends and I would walk around the streets at night looking for parties to gatecrash, lol. We never found one. On one particular night, we decided to walk down a street on the outskirts of town, which was surrounded by farmland and a few industrial buildings. There was a street light maybe every 20 meters, so the street itself was very dark. Once we got to a particular street light, we heard the sound of intense wings flapping from above us. We each looked up, and what we saw is something I still don't fully comprehend. Its wingspan seemed enormous, and along with its wings, it seemed to have 4 limbs and an oddly humanoid shape. It made the sound of what I can only describe as the piercing sound a train makes when it makes a turn. The 3 of us sprinted back to town and did not say a word to each other for about 30 seconds of sprinting. None of us could figure out what this was, but from popular culture, it seems similar to the Mothman legends that have been described throughout the world. One of the legends is that the appearance of the Mothman is a prophecy for death. The mother of one of the friends I was with that night died of cancer shortly after. Another thing worth nothing, there was a patch of graffiti on a rail bridge close to the area where this happened. The graffiti was of a humanoid figure with large wings. I'd never taken much notice of it over the years, until that night. In college, I had a summer internship in a national park that had just ended a wolf reintroduction program. A number of interns were housed in an area of cabins clustered together on a one-lane gravel road. I was staying in a different area of the park, and I had gone over to the cabins for dinner one night. I left pretty late, close to midnight, and was enjoying the quiet walk down the road to my car. It was a clear night with a full moon, and the conifers growing on either side of the road shaded it almost entirely. As I'm walking, I see a light-colored shape on the other side of the road coming in my direction. I kept walking slowly, and as we drew toward each other, I saw that it was an enormous canid of some sort, far too big to be a coyote, but as far as we knew, all the wolves had been relocated. We each kept our pace, and it never turned its head or anything, it just kept walking. I somehow managed not to piss myself, but by the time I got into my car, I was shaking so hard I could barely get my key in the ignition. Everyone I've told thinks I was exaggerating, but I was stone cold sober, less than 10 feet from it, and that animal's back was up to my waist, easily the biggest dog creature I've ever seen. In high school, I briefly dated a gothy chick whose idea of a good time was to hang out, and yeah, occasionally make out, in the old graveyard out on the edge of town. She was not my favorite thing in the world, but she was cute, and I was 16, so there you have it. One night, she told me to meet her there. The place was dark and empty, as always. I had my phone flashlight and was poking my way through the headstones to the tree that was our usual meet-up spot when I saw some movement in my peripheral vision. I turned the light to where I thought it was in time to see a silhouette move behind a headstone about 30 yards away. I was sure it was her trying to scare me, which she sometimes did, and called out to her, and in response, I heard a female voice, but not hers, call the same name back to me, like it was mocking me. I turned and sprinted back to the road. I texted her from my car. She said she hadn't left her house yet. I canceled on her and drove home. Last summer, my family and I wanted to go to Canada for a family vacation. We packed up everything, including the family dog, and went on ahead to a super cool cabin up in a remote area. It was very scenic. It was in the middle of the woods, next to a large lake. It's basically heaven for me and my dog, who love to go hiking and explore nature together. The first couple of days I would take my dog out and me and her would go hiking on our own. I've now learned this is very stupid and no to go with another human, while my family went fishing. It was great, and the trails were amazing. Well, one night, I couldn't sleep. For some reason, I was literally wide awake. So what do? I take my dog and go outside for a midnight stroll. For more context, my dog is a 53-pound pit bull. I always feel safe with her, and I know she'll do her best to protect me in any situation. Because of this, I've put myself in some pretty stupid situations, trusting she'll help me out if things turn south. I know, stupid. Anyway, me and Maisie hit the road. I don't put her on a leash because the closest cabin is many miles away, and we're basically cut off from other people, so she won't bother anyone. After maybe 20 minutes of walking, I swear to God, I can hear footsteps. Like hard, crushing leaves, breaking sticks, and footsteps. My doesn't growl or bark, she just looks behind us, so I trust her, and we keep going, walking further and further away from the cabin until it's no longer in sight. The moon is bright, and the trees aren't very dense, so we have a lot of moonlight. We finally reach the lake, and I sit down on the bank, skipping rocks and just enjoying myself. My wanders off down the shore, sniffing things and being a dog. I glance down at the water. A silhouette of a man is in the ducking water. He's standing maybe 10 feet behind me. I can't breath. I'm ducking frozen stiff. My heart is pounding. Finally, my turns and begins to growl. To this day, I know I wasn't making it up because her growl was nothing I've ever heard before. Full on, back of the throat, snarling. Beast mode. I keep my eyes on the water and am still not moving. Finally, he backs up and leaves. As soon as I feel able to move again, I ducking book it back to the cabin, Maisie running behind me. I told my parents, and they never believed me because we were so far away from people that they didn't think anyone would be out this far. I grew up in the middle of nowhere in Washington state. Out in the sticks. My cousin and I were outside late playing basketball. We've both seen it. We stopped playing when out behind my house, which is a straight swamp with trees, as far as the eye can see, rose a giant ball of light. It was huge and sort of diamond-shaped. It appeared to have been right behind my house, but accounting for its size, it was probably further than I thought. We both screamed and freaked out. When we started running to the house to notify our parents, we watched it take off in practically a blink. We ran into the house, frantically explaining what we had seen. Our parents just wrote it off as childhood paranoia. I still remember it as clear as day. When I was younger, rounds 14 to 15, my girlfriend, her sister, and I were getting a ride home from a party we went to late at night with my girlfriend's mom. As we passed a farmer's field, I saw some weird shape crouched by the side of the road out in front of us. As we got closer and I could see it in more detail, it looked like a creepy gargoyle-type creature. It was small, probably only 4 tall max, skinny, and by skinny, I mean I could make out its spine, ribs, and shoulder blades, and it was this strange dark green color. But the creepiest part was the eyes, which I'll never forget. Even now, I have goosebumps and feel super uneasy just thinking about it. Its eyes were the deepest golden yellow I've ever seen, and they were almost glowing in the dark. As soon as I saw it up close, I thought it must be a person in a costume, but I came to the conclusion that it was so small and skinny, and the location it was in couldn't have been a person. Plus, I just felt this unnatural fear when I looked at it. After a few minutes went by, after driving by it in silence, I asked everyone in the car, "Did you guys see that thing?" And immediately everyone exploded with, "Yeah. WTF was that thing?" To this day, my wife and I are creeped out when we drive by that spot at night, and we have never come up with an explanation. I was asleep one night with very little on as it was super hot and my room didn't have AC, and I had a glass door that led into the backyard, and I had left it cracked to get a bit of airflow. I would have been about 17 or 18, and I distinctly remember dreaming nice dreams until it suddenly turned into dreaming about watching myself asleep at the window with a bunch of other people watching me and banging on the window as if to try and wake me up. Then I shot back into my body, and it felt as if someone had slammed both of their hands on either side of my body to get me to wake up. I jerked awake, was sweating, and was super freaked out. I looked up, and there was a man in the backyard looking right at me. I screamed, and he turned, ran, and jumped over the fence we had. The fence banged against the brick wall, and I slammed the door shut and ran upstairs. I woke up my mom and partner and tried to tell them what happened. They didn't believe me and just said the whole thing was a nightmare, but I knew it wasn't. It wasn't the only freaky thing to happen in that house that made me believe ghosties were real, either. I saw an enormous gray triangle flying several times the speed of sound. I've seen Mach 1 in flight at similar altitude, completely silent with no apparent propulsion, a glimmering energy shield-esque phenomenon centered around the nose and becoming fainter around the rest of the craft, and an incredibly bright, circular white light right in the center, which was blinking on and off at regular intervals. The craft had a stable, horizontal trajectory, and it looked low, maybe no more than 1,000 altitudes. It was larger than a passenger jet, but not by much. I flew right over my head as I knocked on a buddy's door. He opened it, and I was still staring at the sky. He said it looked like I'd just seen a ghost. If you ask me, there is no way any government has that technology. It was definitely a machine. People always doubt it's aliens, but let me tell you, there is no doubt when you see one. I was driving to South Dakota to visit family and drove all night. Around 7 a.m., tired and almost 45 minutes from my destination, I look east from the highway, and deep in the plains, there is this huge golden bridge-shaded structure. Mended with the clouds and the sparkle of the sun, it almost looked heavenly-esque. I mean, it looked small from the car, but I understand depth perception, and up close, that would be a huge Golden Gate-sized structure. It looks like it stretched from north to south, as far as I could see. I rubbed my eyes, still there. I just remember thinking I'm ducking tired as shit. I've driven this road many times, and there ain't shit that way except grassy plains. Fast forward, maybe a year or two, and I'm back in South Dakota, working for the summer with my family. One day for work, we had to drive down this same road early, around 8 a.m., when one of the guys goes, "Remember this one morning, we were driving down this same road for work, and this golden bridge-looking thing, huge as duck, was on the horizon over there, pointing to the east where I saw it years earlier." All of a sudden, instantly, when he said that, I remembered that moment from years earlier. I freaked out because I thought I was hallucinating, but they described exactly what I saw. This is South Dakota, and there ain't no huge golden bridge-looking object anywhere in that state. It still baffles me to this day. Try not to think too much about it, because I haven't seen it since. Weird as shit, though. When I was 3 to 4 years old, I had a best friend named Abigail. We did everything together. We played in the sandbox, creeks and rivers, playgrounds, you name it, we were sidekicks. I even drew her portrait one day and told my mom to save it somewhere safe so I could give it to her on her birthday. I still have it somewhere, but I drew a girl with dark shoulder-length hair with a red bow in it. She was wearing a blue jumper-like dress with a long-sleeve red shirt under it. And brown shoes. I'll have to find it to show you. I just remember I loved playing with her, and then one day I just never saw her again. If this were my mom telling the story, she would say that, at this age, I was just an independent little girl who liked to play and be by herself. She just thought Abigail was an imaginary friend. Until one day, when I was about 11 to 12 years old, the local historical society posted a researched historical article detailing the events of a tragic farmhouse fire that happened about 75 to 80 years prior on the property that our subdivision was built on. The fire was devastating, in which a family of 6, 2 parents, and 4 kids were all killed. One of those kids was 4 years old, and her name was Abigail. A picture of the family was included in the article, black and white, but you could clearly see the little girl had dark shoulder-length hair with a bow in it and was wearing a jumper with a long-sleeve shirt under it. To this day, my mom still refuses to believe my best friend was probably a ghost. It was around 2 a.m. when I was walking home from a friend's house right down the street from my own. Across the street from me, set off further back from the road, is a line of young pine trees. Behind the trees was a power substation, and the security light of the substation backlit the trees. So I'm just walking down the road, minding my own business, when I see something large moving over by the pines. What came next was quite possibly the most horrifying thing to ever happen. I'll never forget it. As I keep walking, I just barely turn my head in the direction of the movement. And I see this thin, tall thing. It was walking between the pine trees, upright on 2 legs, like a person. But aside from that, nothing else resembled a normal person. It was incredibly thin, and its arms were unnaturally long compared to its other proportions. Its body was entirely black, from what I could see in that low street light. But the thing that stood out most was its head. The head was very white and had little to no features. It was just a very pale, flat face. I don't even remember seeing eyes. It was just this white, featureless head. A sense of danger hadn't even clicked with me yet. I keep my head only slightly tilted, but I tried so hard to stay facing forward as to give the appearance that I'm not looking at it. But as I'm walking, my eyes stay locked on it from the side. Does that make sense? Finally, its head jerked in my direction as if it were alarmed, and it quickly jumped behind a tree. Now that it's out of sight, I close my eyes tightly. I tell myself that I just imagined it. It's dark outside, and the dark is playing tricks on me. It's fine. I'm just crazy. I walk a few more feet, now past the pine tree that it jumped behind, and I open my eyes again. I turn my head in its direction now, 100% confident that nothing will be there. Commence shitting myself. There it stood, pressing its body so hard into the side of that pine tree. Its face locked right on me. There was a little hesitation. Within a split second, it fell onto all fours and broke into a sprint like some sort of ducking animal. It ran back from the direction it originally came, which happened to also be the direction I was walking. In that same second, I began to run for my house. I have never run so fast in my life. I've never felt such dread in my life. The thing disappeared behind a house as I ran down the road, so I lost sight of it. At that point, I just kept my head straight and my eyes on what was in front of me. But even though I couldn't see it anymore, I could hear it running off into the distance. I ran into my house, but even though I was in the house, I didn't slow down. I locked and barricaded all of the doors of the house and covered all the windows. My siblings were playing video games when I ran in, and I'm sure I freaked them the duck out. I told them what I saw. And for the most part, they could tell that I saw something. I've told other people about my experience, and they all just kind of laugh it off like I'm crazy. Let me finish by saying this: I've never been the type of person to believe in spooky monsters, aliens, or other paranormal things. And even after that experience, I'm still not. But I can't forget it. If it was a hallucination, it was a damn horrifying one. When I was much younger, I remember waking up in the middle of the night to see this huge, glowing pink Easter bunny in the doorway of the room I shared with my twin. It was about the size of a regular man, glowed pink, and where the eyes should have been were pitch black holes. The giant bunny stopped in my doorway, waved at me, raised its finger to its lips, and walked into my parents' room down the hall. I remember waking up my twin and asking her if she saw what I did and just laying there debating whether or not it was our dad being super hyped about Easter or something. The next day, my parents found baskets of candy for each of my siblings in their room and freaked out about how they got there, whether or not they left the house unlocked, etc. We then had a very long discussion about not letting strangers into the house and waking them up if we ever saw anything. I don't think they believed us when we said we saw a giant pink bunny, though. My friend's grandma's house is or was right up against a cemetery. He always told me it was haunted and I would see crazy stuff there, but I never believed him. One night, we were over her house, and I swear, I saw something the size of a toddler run from the living room, through the dining room, and into the kitchen. When I looked at my friend, he just went, "Did you just see that kid run through the ducking house?" It looked more like a fast-running shadow than an actual person. There was no one there. There were no kids around, it was his grandma's house, and we were the only ones over. It was late at night, and no doors opened or closed. When we told his grandma, she was just like, "Oh, don't worry about it. It happens all the time." After that, I started believing in ghosts. My friend also said that when he used to sleep there, he used to push the spare room's TV away from him so it faced away from him because he would wake up at night and see people in the reflection staring back at him and watching him sleep. I scared the shit out of him. I was in a car with my mother, taking a not quite back road because of heavy traffic for some reason or another. There wasn't anybody else on the road, and it was just a small bit after sunset, so the sky was still relatively light in the area. We went around a bend, and there was this massive, bloody bird, perched on the road, over the back half of a small deer. The front half was literally just gone. It took off towards us, my mom slammed on the brakes, and I swear it was the size of a ducking mastiff. Not just the wingspan, which looked like it took up the entire road, but holy SHT, it actually looked giant. Apparently, it was a cinereous vulture, or a black vulture, which can be found here in NY. They don't get that ducking large. They're also technically not native to New York and have been moving north from the southern hemisphere and farther. And that thing was ducking massive, we were in ducking shock from it. We don't know where the hell it came from or where it went, but after that, we ducking booked it back to our house in 20 minutes. I've seen coyotes, I've seen mountain lions, and I've seen alligators, but nothing has freaked me out more than seeing that vulture. And when I said bloody, I meant dripping blood like a leaky faucet over the first half of its body. Nobody else believes us, and nobody else has spotted it. Duck if we're not bringing a dashcam next time we go near that road, though. One night I had to go to the bathroom, which was on another floor as I lived in the attic, and the house I lived in back then was pre-World War II European, which is always a good setup for a haunting. I don't generally believe in ghosts and have since come to the conclusion that I was hallucinating or dreaming, but that wasn't what it felt like. After using the bathroom, I washed my hands and looked in the mirror above the sink. My eyes weren't looking back at me. The rest of my body matched up. I waved my hands around, made a couple of weird faces, and the mirror worked as usual. But my eyes in the reflection are not staring back at me, they are pointed away, fixed on the same spot, even when I looked away and back at the mirror. I play around with it for a minute or so, growing more and more spooked the more my sleepiness leaves me, and I am more and more awake, realizing how damn weird and creepy it is. My eyes in the reflection, no matter how I point, are staring hard to the left, or my reflections to the right. Terrified, I turn my head and peek out the bathroom door to see what it was looking at. It was nothing. I look back at the mirror, and my eyes are back to normal. I ran to my room and hid under my blankets until I fell asleep. The next day, I snooped around the area. I found a dead spider, those ultra spindly leg bois, in the general direction my reflection was looking at, but that's not saying much because the house had a bit of a spider problem. There was one moment that will stick with me forever that I get mixed reactions to when I tell the story. I was 20 at the time and was helping my girlfriend move from Alabama to Los Angeles. Because she had all her belongings and her car, we decided to drive. At that time, she had a suspended license, so I was the one who was forced to drive the whole way. Because I didn't want to get any speeding tickets, I brought my radar detector from home to take with us on the drive. Now it was the second day of our trip, and we had recently crossed into New Mexico. At the time, it was already well past sunset, so most of my drive that day was spent on the I-10 at night. Because I was the only driver, I made the decision to stop every couple of hours at rest stops to use the restroom, stretch, or eat. I remember stopping that night really late, at around 11 or 12, at a rest stop in Gage, New Mexico. From what I remember, the rest stop was really the only thing off the exit, and there was nothing as far as a town or homes in the area for miles. The only thing there was a small area with many identical concrete structures covering picnic tables. They were like concrete boxes, three-sided, with window cutouts and a light in the middle. As we were pulling in, the radar detector started going haywire, showing codes for multiple different bands, including X, Ka, and laser, all at once. I turned the radar detector off, not really thinking much of it at the time, and pulled into a picnic area near the back. From what I remembered, I was going to eat a snack or something to tide me over, and as I was grabbing the food from the middle row, I heard a low rumble or squeak as someone was rubbing their palm along the side of the car. As I was grabbing some items from a bag in my lap, my girlfriend at the time grabbed my arm with the most intense grip and fear and just started saying, we gotta go, with increasing panic. I'll never forget what I saw, TBH. In her side mirror, there was a large, rough silhouette leaning against the car just past the back door. Even from a glance, I could tell that the figure had to be much taller than the SUV, as it looked a bit hunched over. Seeing this, I immediately started to panic, as I was not sure if this was a person, animal, or whatever. As I was fumbling for the keys in the cup holder, I glanced in my side mirror and saw the same exact figure, motionless against the side of the car. A few seconds later, I started the car and punched it out of there. Where our car was parked, there was nothing visible from the light coming from the picnic awning. I'm not a huge believer in paranormal stuff, but this was an experience that I would 100% call my only real paranormal encounter. The size of whatever it was definitely not human, and although it was somewhat human, the amount of hair it had on its head made it hard to tell what it actually looked like. A friend that I met later in college from New Mexico who had lived on a reservation once suggested that it could have been a Wendigo or some other native folklore beast. I still don't know at all what it was for sure, but I still occasionally have nightmares about that night. When I was little, 7 or 8, I woke up one night to a white dog sitting in the doorway of my bedroom. This was weird because we didn't have a dog or any other indoor pets. While I watched, it got up and went down the hall towards the living room. I got up, looked down the dark, empty hall, and went in the opposite direction to my parents' room. I woke my mom up and told her there was a dog in the house. She got up, and we looked but didn't find anything. She thought I was dreaming. At some point, when I was older, I found a picture of the dog my parents had when I was a baby. I learned from my mom that the dog often slept in my doorway, guarding my room. But the dog died before I was 2. The dog in the picture was the dog I saw that night. It was over 10 years ago now when a friend and I visited Japan. It was our first time there, so we went with a tour company. However, after the tour ended, we stayed an extra night in a hotel in East Ikebukuro. During the tour leader tells us stories of haunted hotels and other urban myths, as you do over beers or when you're enjoying a late night onsen. One of the things he'd tell us was to be wary if you find a room where the head of the bed is positioned next to the window, so if you look up while lying in bed, you look out the window. He'd try to scare us by saying that in those rooms, ghosts would come through the window at night and drag you out to your death. Back to the East Ikebukuro Hotel, we check in the early evening, and the first thing we notice is how small the room is. The second thing was that they gave us a double bed instead of twin singles. The third was that the bedhead was right next to the window. We rationalized that the room was too small to align the bed any other way, and the tour leader was full of shit. To be honest, we were more annoyed that we had to share a double bed, no homo. We decided to just let it go since it was just for one night. So we went out for dinner before turning in for the night. That night I got woken up by a door slamming shut, and I jolted up. There, sitting at the foot of the bed, is a woman in a blue kimono. She had long hair, and from what I could make out, her kimono had butterflies on it. I freak out, dive, and bury my head under my pillow. Looking back, that was a useless move if anything bad were to happen. I remember thinking, is this real? How can I check without looking? In my genius, I decided to shuffle my foot down the bed, thinking if I don't touch anything, it's just my imagination. I didn't think about what I'd do if I did touch something. Little by little, my foot moves down the bed, and I notice that there is definitely a depression at the foot of the bed. Something? Was there. I retreat my foot, start to sweat, and at this point just start repeatedly saying the Lord's Prayer till I must have fainted or fallen back asleep. I remember waking up at 6 the next morning, and my friend was already dressed and packed. I asked him if he saw or heard anything last night, and all he said was, I don't want to talk about it, let's check it out. I have an uncle who always went on weekend hunting trips by himself. I don't know how far into the wilderness he went because it was only squirrel hunting, but it was always 3 to 4 days out in the woods alone. About 4 years ago, he stopped going alone and came back early from one of his trips after he swore he saw a little boy running around and playing in the woods. He only goes to larger 5 to 6 parties, is always buddies with someone, and never stays as long now. I want to add that the spots he went to were off-road mountain spots. These were pretty far from things like campsites, etc. I don't know. I believe he saw something. I just don't know what. I should have added what he claimed happened, and so here you guys go. He was walking around trying to find a good spot to sit and wait when, he claims, he heard what seemed to be a little boy laughing. He kind of paused and looked around, scanning the trees, etc. Then, in the distance, he said he saw this boy just run across this forested area. He swears it had to be a boy because the boy was wearing a blue jacket. He said it was just a brief moment, like a few seconds, but it looked like the boy was playing hide and seek or something. He said he immediately got this bad feeling. He kept staring at the spot, but the boy was gone after a brief moment. He turned around and started walking back. My uncle was certain it wasn't just campers or another hunter with his kid because, in all his years of hunting at that spot, he's never run into anybody else. I think that's the more likely option, but I don't know. I also wanted to add the fact that this was a pretty major event for him. He's been hunting his entire life and is pretty used to trips alone. It's not like he's a guy who jumps at random noises in the forest. My husband works shifts One morning, around 5 a.m., he had just left our bungalow to walk to the bus stop to catch the first of 2 buses to work. Being summer, it was very bright for the time of morning, and he told me he was just collecting his thoughts, thinking about the tasks he had to do that day and the list of groceries that I asked him to get when, from above and a little way off, he heard a rustling of leaves from a tree behind a wall of a garden. Thinking it was a squirrel, he looked up and told me he thought he was seeing things. What he said he saw was a small, black-bodied, sleek figure walking or running on 4 skinny legs resembling a monkey with a long, rat-like tail. It looked like the head was round, with pointed ears on either side of it. My husband couldn't see the creature's facial features as it moved with extreme speed. When it hit the ground, it scurried away from him, but he said he swore he saw what he thought was a wing. In the brief time he saw the creature airborne, which appeared to be pinned back to the side of the creature's body on the nearest side to him. My husband is a practical, no-nonsense man who is somewhat skeptical about the supernatural and paranormal, although he doesn't disbelieve altogether. He was slightly reluctant to tell me in case I thought he was having me on. We discussed the incident that night when he got home. He had already texted me about it, and I was intrigued. I did ask my husband if it could have been a large bat. After talking about it and thinking it through properly, we concluded it couldn't have been a bat, as this creature that my husband saw had 4 legs and a rat's tail. We walk that route all the time, to get out of the estate into the shops, before and since the incident, and we've never seen a creature like that. We are both natives to London, and we are unaware of such a creature even existing, so we are still trying to work out what this creature could have been. So I've lived in the house I'm living in now since I was about 5 or 6. I am now 21. So a week or so before we moved into the house, we came in so we could have a second look around, and I got to explore the house on my own. So I go to the basement. My house was built in the mid-60s, so it had that old style wood paneling on the walls. So I'm exploring the basement and go into the main basement area, and I see this red door to my right, so I open it and go on and explore. So there's a duck ton of old things in the room inside the red door, and I play with some of the stuff and kind of just look around. I should say the house I live in is part of a condo complex. The red door room is pretty big, a bit bigger than the main basement area. So I get bored with that area and leave the room, close the door, and explore the rest of the house. Fast forward a week, we are almost fully moved in, and I go to the basement, and the red door is nowhere to be found. Where it should have been is covered by the wood paneling, like the rest of the basement. I was confused and then went to ask my parents where the red door in the basement went. They remember me asking them this pretty clearly, and they say there's never been a red door in the basement ever. My 5-year-old mind is absolutely confused and puzzled about this. Now fast forward to when I was 15. I had a bunch of friends over, and we were playing darts. The dart board sits right where the red door should be, and I went over to my darts and felt a massive draft from the wall, exactly where the red door was. Confused as all hell, I remember the red door all of a sudden, and it all comes back to me, my confusion, my amazement, my curiosity. Now, fast forward to now. I recently proposed the idea to my parents to replace the wood paneling in the basement with drywall so it looks more updated and nicer. There's ulterior motives here. In all reality, I want to tear down the wood paneling to see if there really is a red door. I was younger, 14 or 15 years old, and at a friend's party one night. It was in the woods, and a new road was being built slowly as people bought lots further into the wooded area. No lights other than the moon and house lights if you walk outside, etc. The girl who lived there told us that there was a haunted house down the road, and nobody lived there for years. So obviously, we went to check it out. It was a very old, wooded shack, almost falling apart. When we got there, I saw a car parked in front and took a memory picture of it. It was an old Oldsmobile, probably black or dark brown. I don't mention it because it might have been neighbors or something. We took a glance at the locked front door. We go to the side, and the side door is unlocked, half falling apart. We enter and take a look around. Everything is almost decomposed, wooden furniture is falling apart, and food is rotten everywhere. There are no signs of life. What I saw was absolutely stunning. It was a smoking cigarette on the countertop. Like it was halfway through. I took my phone, put the flashlight toward it, and it was real. I thought there was someone in the house, so I called my friends to come see. Back to the cigarette, it was gone. There were no signs of a cigarette there. They laugh at me for freaking out, and we go out. I took a glance behind me and saw no signs of life. Going back to the road, I see that the old car wasn't there, so I assumed it was someone from across the street who was visiting and left, but there was no house on the other side of the house. There wasn't even a house between my friends and this old house we went into. We went back to the party, and around the bonfire, we were sharing our story about the house with other people. I told them there was a car when we got in, but it wasn't there when we got out, and I remember the license plate. Nobody noticed the car. I told them the license plate, and everyone laughed at me, saying I must have freaked out and seen ghosts. Later that night, a girl came to me and showed me a picture of when we got to the house. It was very dark, but we could see a car, and the flash was showing the back of the car. Same license plate. So either I saw a ghost car or there was someone in the house, and they freaked out and left in a rush when we got there, knocking the cigarette on the floor or something. Nobody believed me. There's this place called Apple Hill. It's a popular local attraction in the valley. Basically, it's a cute little family destination. You go there to pick apples and stuff. I went there with my family when I was 11. My cousins, my sister, and I were busy picking raspberries or some shit. We made it like a competition. Who could get the most berries? We were pretty spread out. It wasn't long before I was fairly far away from all the other berry pickers. I was super focused on picking berries. I had no idea how far away I was from everyone else. All of a sudden, it got really quiet. I could barely hear the voices of my family. Then a giant gust of wind pushed against my back. I turned around and noticed a small hut not too far away from me. It was too big to be a shed but not big enough to be a full-on house. It was super run down. I remember looking at the hut and being really spooked. Then, out of nowhere, this black cat comes from behind me and rubs up against my leg. I freaked the duck out. The house was already giving me the creeps, and then this random animal decided to rub up against me. The cat doesn't back the duck off like normal cats. I wasn't afraid. It just looked up at me. I kept my eyes on the cat. I swear, something about that cat didn't feel right. It was just sitting right beside me. Then the weirdest thing I've ever seen happened. It's so vivid in my mind. The heavy wind started up again. This random dust devil formed around the cat. I could feel grains of sand brushing up against me. I stepped back. It got really thick for a moment. Then it cleared up a bit and began to move. The cat was nowhere to be seen, but the dust devil slowly made its way to the hut. I felt like the wind was pushing me in the direction of the devil. Part of me wanted to follow it. It floated right into the hut. I don't know why, but the hut felt so welcoming for a moment. I really wanted to go check it out. I started walking towards it, but then I heard my name being called. My sister and cousins were looking for me. They came up to me, and I told them all about what I had seen. Nobody ducking believed me, but at the same time, nobody wanted to go check out the hut. They all got creepy vibes from it. Look, I'm not saying there's a witch at Apple Hill trying to kidnap kids, but there is definitely a witch at Apple Hill trying to kidnap kids. I was deer hunting with a friend on some property my uncle owns in a pretty remote area. It is right off of a main road, with only a couple trailer homes along the side, and to get to the tree stand, it takes a good 20 minutes walking up and down hills through some thick forest. So let me try to paint a little bit of a picture here to make this easier to explain. At the base of the last hill is our two-person tree stand for hunting, and then there is about 100 feet of land to the lake. But this part is pretty thin, about 60 feet, creating a peninsula jutting from the land to our left with the rest of the lake behind it. So, about 45 minutes before the sun rises, we start to hear knocking sounds from the tip of the peninsula that sound a lot like male deer fighting with their antlers. We start getting pretty excited, thinking, hey, yeah, there's at least 2 bucks out there. Then we hear the knocking coming from the other end of the peninsula as well. Well, that's crazy, we have 4 male deer here? The knocking goes on for a few minutes, getting a little closer, then we realize it is way too precise to be deer fighting. Then I noticed that when the one on the right clicks once, the other clicks once, and when one clicks twice, the other clicks twice. They're directly mimicking each other. This couldn't have been an echo, they were spaced out a little far apart, it wasn't instant like an echo would be, and they were both about the same volume. Over the next few minutes, the knocking sounds get closer and closer together. Then, for about 10 minutes, nothing. Out of nowhere, we hear something like an animal on the peninsula dying, almost like a hurt dog yelping. Then we hear a loud thud, and all goes quiet. We look at each other, not sure what to say. I stand up and scream, "Who's out there?" And then I hear the most blood-curdling, awful noise that I have ever heard in my goddamn life. I'm shaking right now, I'm just thinking about it. It started as a low, deep growl and turned into a high, raspy howl, and my blood instantly went cold. My friend and I look back at each other, saying, "What the duck was that?" at the same time. So I yell again, something like, "You better get out of here." Whatever it was howls one more time and takes off through the woods, and I swear to you, I could feel its footsteps. Whatever it was bipedal. I've taken many tracking and hunting classes, I grew up in the woods, and I know what a running deer sounds like. This 100% had 2 legs. Then it crashed through some cattails on the edge of the lake and through the forest. It was winter, so no leaves. We could see them moving and see how fast it moved through probably a foot of mud and cattails. We didn't say a word. We got down one at a time while the other was pointing their gun where we heard the noises and walked out of there backwards. We left and called everyone we knew, but as college-age kids, none of our friends were up. Nobody believed us, so I wanted to go back that afternoon and see if I could find any tracks in the mud where we saw it run. My friend wouldn't go with me, so I went alone. When I got to the cattails on the peninsula, something else had already come back before me. A large branch had wiped all of the footprints from the mud and was lying next to them in the woods. I've been back maybe twice since then, it's been about 5 years. I'm always armed, and I'm always with someone else. I have many stories because I do cleansings for people and dabble in pagan practices. They all can be pretty wild, but the one most people have the hardest time understanding was witnessed by myself, my mother, and my sister. This occurred when I was 8, so 1998 was a small town in Alabama. My family had bought this house on the lake. A real haunted shitfest, but hindsight, you know? Literally the second day of moving in, we experienced something. Also, this took place well before any dive into the occult. My family was a non-denominational Christian. The house had 6 bedrooms, 4 baths, and a top and basement layout. We all had our rooms on the top floor. My room and my parents' room were the furthest down the hall. My sister was near the beginning, right across from the bathroom. So the hall wasn't super long, but my sister, who had decided to put like 14 to 15 family portraits up on the walls, varied in size and weight. Now, our mom was in the living room, which is what the hall opened to. So, not far and certainly in sight of one another. Dad was gone, probably to work or something. I was in my room, putting up posters. Nothing out of the ordinary, and it was midday. When my sister finished putting the pictures up, she came to get me to show me. She was proud of her work. We were right outside my room talking when we suddenly felt super uneasy. The atmosphere had changed. I didn't understand it at the time, but it was just too heavy and difficult to think straight and breathe. Needless to say, our conversation halted. Even my mom felt it and stopped unpacking things. She turned to look at us. All of a sudden, we felt and heard this worship of wind go from my parents' room right in front of us, down the hall. All of those ducking pictures levitated off the wall and floated midair, resting in a horizontal position, parallel to the ground. We screamed and ran to our mom. We were as hysterical as you can imagine. Mom said she was scared, but she had to be Mama Bear and protect her babies. She said firmly, "Stop. You are scaring my children." She also told it to leave because it was not welcome here. In this part, I didn't see because my face was buried in my mom's side as I was crying. She said the pictures all floated down and came to rest in their original spots. The ceiling seemed to just rise and become far away suddenly. My sister saw this too. I have no idea how else to explain it. They only ever described it this way. But the house became normal again, like nothing had ever happened. My dad never believed it, despite all 3 of us experiencing it. Honestly, that was the most tame thing we experienced in the house. 7 years of hell we endured there. I was doing my soldier qualification, square, training in New Brunswick back when I was 20. Part of the training was sleep deprivation week. You're out in the field digging and fortifying trenches while being forced to stay awake for 4 days straight. At the start of the week, my instructors told us that we would hallucinate, and if you see something you're not sure is real, double check it with your fire team partner. There were actors who would approach our trenches and go through challenge procedures. I think it was on night 2 that I thought I saw an actor approaching. So in the pitch black night, I began my challenge procedure. An instructor comes up behind me and reminds me to check with my fire team partner to ensure what I'm seeing is real. He then proceeded to shine his flashlight on a bush in front of me that was swaying from the wind. The next night is when it happened. I was working on my trench when this massive, and I mean massive, object flew overhead. It didn't seem like it was way up, like a comet or a shooting star, and it was close enough to tell that it obviously wasn't a plane. Whatever it was, it had a wavy purple tail trailing it as it flew overhead. Based on what happened the previous night, I got my fire team partner's attention and asked if he just saw what flew over us. He responds, "Yeah, that purple thing or whatever it was." Apparently, one other person from our section saw it as well. With the speed it was moving at, there were only a few seconds where you could have noticed it. To this day, I have no idea what that thing was. About a year ago, a few friends and myself decided to go into the woods to take some cool pictures with our new speedlights, flashes that go on top of cameras, like you'd see a wedding photographer use. We drove about 30 minutes northwest of Las Vegas into Kyle Canyon. We stopped at a place I have explored before, with a few slot canyons and caves. When I first explored it, I was alone, and I had a very uneasy feeling about the area, but I denounced it as me just being scared. We arrived around 10 p.m., it was a very dark night, and the moon wasn't very bright that night. We made a few jokes about there being no cell reception and to not get killed up here because nobody will find us. We made our way into the slot canyons when one of our friends, who had never touched a nice camera before, decided to take a picture of a cliff beside us. His flash went off, and at that exact moment, we heard something roar or scream at us. I have spent most of my life in the outdoors, and I have never heard of an animal that could make such a noise. We immediately ran and got to my car, where the passenger took images out the window as I checked the camera of my friend to see what he shot. The image number was deleted off of the camera somehow. He assured us that he doesn't know how to work a camera, let alone delete an image. As we got home, we checked the second camera and found a figure standing at the location of the noise with glowing eyes, hunched behind a bush. The figure is gone in the following images. After research of the area, we found out that there have been many weird sightings in the woods, as well as a cult ritual site in the 70s being tucked away in the mountains in the general area. We decided to go back the following week and found a cave with a stack of wood and a backpack that was ripped apart. We noticed a rock formation depicting one from the Blair Witch Project. My friend, trying to be funny, knocked it over. We returned a mere 25 minutes later to find every stone smashed into smaller pieces, definitely not done by our friend who was with us the entire time. Again, we came back with larger groups, mostly girls, whom we were trying to scare because that's what high school kids do. When we reached the caves, we proceeded to take selfies. After returning to the truck, all of the images on our phones were deleted except for one image of our entire group from behind. I know this is a far reach to believe, but the girls involved never spoke to us again to this day. We hadn't returned for quite a while, however, we did go to the lodge in the mountains for hot chocolate one night a few months ago. We passed the area, and a car was parked on the side of the road, which we thought was strange for a weekday around 11 p.m. midnight. The following day, a story broke on the news of the body of a man being found off the road covered by rocks. His car was the one we passed. A few weeks after we decided to go to our spot and just take pictures again to survey the area, throughout the session we noticed a figure off in the distance, but we figured it was our imaginations. Of course, being scared in the dark forest will mess with you. We pulled up the images that night and found what appeared to be something walking parallel to us in the distance. Again, this image is attached at the end. The last time we went out, this being a few weeks ago, we drove a dirt road back into the mountains and got out a few times to survey. Eventually, we came across an abandoned barn with a sign that read, "Invitations only." As we drove away, a car caught up with us, and a man, who looked to be wearing a gown of some sort, asked us what we were doing and if we were okay. To which we told him we were just hikers. As we made our way home, a friend of mine said he couldn't find his wallet, so we concluded he dropped it when we stopped on the dirt road and got out. We came back the next day and hiked in the mountains to find his wallet, which we thankfully did, but found it was chewed up. I grew up on extremely rural land, about 30 minutes of driving down dirt and gravel roads before you hit any kind of real civilization. If you call the town less than a 1,000 person civilization, this is in southeastern Missouri for reference. My grandfather was our school bus driver and also our next door neighbor, so we were always the first ones on the bus in the mornings and the last ones off in the afternoon. As we were getting close to home one day after school, I was just sitting there, staring out the bus window into our neighbor's cow field. Cow. 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 Huge black cat. Wait, what? It was a solid black cat, the size of a mountain lion, running across the field. To my knowledge, there are definitely no panthers in southern Missouri. I've seen mountain lions, and I've seen bears. But not a ducking panther. My best guess was that maybe there was a cougar with some weird coloration defect, but when I tried pointing it out to my grandpa or siblings, no one else saw it, and it had already hit the tree line. I'm pretty brave when it comes to being out in the wilderness, but I stayed out of the woods for a while after that. My sister saw something on several occasions throughout our lives. I never actually saw anything, I only heard something extremely vividly. Basically, one night everything was happening as usual. My mom was out with her friends watching some games, and my dad was watching a movie with my sister and me. It was a comedy, so we all went to bed laughing about it. I was lying in bed about half an hour after we were tucked in, reading a book. I heard somebody stomping down the hallway downstairs and then full on sprinting up the stairs. I figured it was just my sister coming back from getting a drink or something, but I would have seen her leave her room because our doors are right beside each other and the staircase is just around the corner. So then I figured it was just my mom coming back home and, for some reason, being extremely loud. The way my door is angled lets me see anybody who comes up the stairs, so I was watching and waiting as they seemed to be in quite a hurry. The footsteps were getting higher and higher up the stairs, but as soon as they got to the top, they completely stopped. There was nothing. My eyes were still totally fixed on the hallway as I got up to check who it was. I turned the corner, and there was nobody. I immediately got covered head to toe with goosebumps and tried to piece together what could have happened. Not even 2 seconds later, I hear my sister screaming, and she comes bolting out of her room with complete terror on her face. Without hesitating, we run into our dad's room, where he is already standing up and asking what's wrong. My sister points back to her room, crying, and says, "There's a man." My dad rushes into the hall, turns the light on, and then turns the light on in her room. He checks the closet and behind everything but doesn't find anything. Then he walks into my room and does the same, but still finds nothing. We spent the next 15 or so minutes holding his hand as he searched the rest of the house, flicking every single light on. He calls my mom to see if she has been home, but she says she's still with her friends. I could even hear the loud bar atmosphere through the phone speaker. We all slept in my dad's room that night. Over the course of the next 7 or so years, my sister ran out of her room crying about the same man in her room. She says he just stands there in the corner and watches her. She described him as a very tall man in a top hat and a trench coat, like a detective, she said. Everything is completely black. It was a couple years after that I stumbled upon what's known as the top hat demon or the phantom hat man. It turns out it's an actual phenomenon. Every description and drawing are exactly what she described that day. I work in a train yard at night, shuttling crews around to and from trains. Now, this yard isn't lit that well in places, leaving large swaths in total darkness. Keep in mind that this is a small depot out in the boonies. Anyway, I'm sitting next to a locomotive, waiting for the crew to hop off and take them back to the office. The area I'm in is right at the edge of the light, so about 25 to 30 feet away is black night, save for my headlights. To my left are 4 sets of tracks, with a grassy field beyond that. To my right, a steep embankment leads down to a creek. The gravel road I'm on leads out in the dark. As I'm sitting there, I see a fox run in from the tracks, across the road, and down the slope. I leaned over the seat to see if I could see it, as it had been sprinting like it was hunting. I sit back up, and there is someone standing in the dark right beyond my lights. It was just one of those spots that was darker than the rest of the night, just black on black, but it was huge. I couldn't make out anything else in the dark, but for some reason it seemed to be getting closer without becoming clearer in the light. I turned my high beams on, and nothing changed, just a huge, dark figure moving closer. I grabbed the radio, starting to get scared, and called for the crew of the train. In the few seconds that it took for them to reply, I swear that thing was freaking. Grinned. I didn't know that something could have such a huge mouth. I'm talking Jaws mouth on a human. It was the only part that seemed to have any real shape to its body, and it practically glowed in the dark. A second later, the crew replied, asking what was wrong. I told them I thought I saw someone walking towards us. They hit the lights on the engine, lighting up everything in front of us. Nothing. Nobody was there, just empty tracks and roads. They shut everything down, climbed off, and I took them back to the office. I told them I was certain that something was in front of us. When we got back to the office, they were nice enough to ask one of the clerks to check the security cameras for that area. We watched the video, finding the spot where the fox runs across the tracks. It shows me sitting there, then, after a few seconds, turning on my high beams. A few seconds later, the engine lights came back on. Nothing. I apologized for bothering them. They said it was fine, they would rather I report something if I saw something, and I went home. That was about 7 to 8 months ago, and I am still wary of going down that stretch. I've not seen anything again, but still, that was a huge grin. In my early 20s, I worked as a security guard at a local cemetery in my city. After the first 2 weeks, the novelty of working in a cemetery wore off, and whenever there was activity reported in areas of the cemetery after we were closed, I would get pissed instead of spooked. Like, what ducking kid is there again, knocking over stones, breaking stuff, vandalizing the dead, etc. This SHT really pisses me off. So disrespectful and just vile to do to someone. This cemetery is about 250 years old, on the East Coast, and is in a wooded grotto area. There are lots of eskers and drumlins, kettles, and valleys. There are lots of little dark pockets where homeless people would sometimes stay, but mostly just teenagers who have no respect for anything breaking stuff. Honestly, if they were there just smoking weed, I'd say, alright. Go on, and call it a day. But if they broke stuff like mausoleum windows, tombstones, spray painting monuments, etc., I'd lose my SHT and call the cops, chase them with the cart, etc. Like WTF, graves and grave markers, mausoleums, crypts, columbariums, etc. are so expensive, and this is someone's last resting place. You have to be careless, oblivious, or a total sociopath to not care and find joy in destroying the shit. One night, about a year into this gig, I was on an overnight. In the overnights, we'd pretty much just drive around all the paths, shining out lights into areas we knew were populated by people sometimes, do some light walking, and basically respond to any alarms going off when they sounded. Again, this was an old cemetery on the East Coast. This means all the trees and groves were very tall, thick, and mature. This also means the graves and monuments are not in neat and boring little rows. They are in patches, family plots, on hills, etc., on winding paths. Most of the time, the alarm would go off, and I would go there, and it was a deer that had tripped the movement sensor. Sometimes it was a tree branch like that in the way, so annoying. Other times, it was actual people there after dark doing what they do. If people were there after dark, it was usually because they were either homeless or young kids partying. It's almost 4 a.m. when the motion sensor alarm goes off in an area of the cemetery near a local university. I'm like, yep, it's ducking kids again. Why can't they smoke their weed on campus like everyone else? My little walkie-talkie thing vibrates, alerting me to the exact area, and I turn the cart around to head there. I remember it was mid-July, and the night was hot. I really wanted to catch these kids, so I parked the cart a few paths away from where the alarm had set off, so they wouldn't hear the cart coming or see the lights. At this point in time, I know this cemetery like the back of my hand, all the little pockets and grottos, even certain names on mausoleums. I was rounding the corners by the mausoleum of the Johnston family. I knew just past the corner of this mausoleum was a small clearing in the trees and that the kids would most likely be in this area. I turn the corner and look out into the clearing. Nothing. No person, no movement, no noises, no telltale smells. Nothing. I look around a bit more, this time with my flashlight. Still nothing. The Johnston family mausoleum is on my left-hand side, and I stop to stand there for a second in the little steps of the portico. I put my hand on the pillar to sort of steady myself, and then I looked out into the clearing again. This time, there was something in the clearing. It sounds so lame, but it was like a black cloud. It was the blackest black I have ever seen, and it was accompanied by this horrible feeling of terror and dread. Like, yes, this is how you die. It all happened so fast, but I remember for a few moments trying to focus on what it was exactly. Was I just seeing a shadow from a tree foreshortened across the distance of the clearing, or was this an erect shadow shape standing there in the middle of the clearing, etc.? I realized that whatever it was moving toward me now, and the feeling of dread and terror was overwhelming. It was a feeling like, oh SHT, it's seen me, and now it's going to come to me. I ran back to the cart immediately and went to drive away to the admin building. I remember, as I put the key in the ignition, the lights coming on and shining directly in front of me toward the clearing up ahead. This was the scariest part to me because, in the few seconds before I peeled away, I saw the light fall on the shape. Or rather, the light just did not fall on the shape. It was like light shining in front of me on all the trees, grass, and stones, but where the shape was, the light was not. Like a black hole or something, you don't see the hole, you just see things around it. It was like a void in space or like a black blank because there was insufficient data for my brain to imagine. It was just a black spot, and it was moving. I drove the cart back to the admin building and looked behind me. The admin building was on the new half of the cemetery, which had lampposts and was well lit. Nothing. No moving black shapes, no feelings of dread approaching, just the aftermath of panic and adrenaline. I parked the cart, plugged it back into the charging port, and went inside. I only had a few more times of the alarm going off for that area of the cemetery, twice at night, once during the day, but I would flat out refuse to go. Let those kids smoke their weed in peace. If they break a tombstone, I'll fix it in the daytime. I told my director this story a few days later, when I saw her in person. The other daytime employees were all maintenance men who did chew and listen to country and would also make fun of me for talking fancy, aka having intellectual conversations, so I didn't bother to turn to them to share this story. When I told my boss, she laughed, saying, "Oh yeah, people have been saying that for years. They call it the shade." I was very intrigued at this point and asked for more. She just rolled her eyes and said she had never seen it herself, but people have reported a black shade moving in that part of the cemetery. Just like it was nothing. "Oh yeah, I've heard that before. I've never been back to that part of the cemetery up close. Sometimes I would drive the cart in the daytime on a big ledge that overlooked the clearing, not necessarily hoping to see anything but expecting to see something. I never saw it again. Don't want to."